"The flowers in the east corridor have been arranged incorrectly again," said Lady Ashmore, not looking up from her correspondence. "See to it before 7. Diana Holt set down her pen, noted the instruction on her list, already 12 items long before 10 o'clock, and went to see to it. The flowers were not arranged incorrectly. They were arranged precisely as Diana had arranged them at 6:30 that morning, before the house had properly woken, and they were correct according to the plan she had drawn up for the evening's reception. White roses at the outer ends, cream dahlias at the centre, the taller stems trimmed to precisely 18 inches, so that guests of any height could converse across them without effort. She adjusted 2 stems by the width of a fingernail, made a note that the instruction had been followed, and returned to her desk. It had been like this for 4 years. The Ashmore townhouse on Grosvenor Square was one of the finest addresses in London, and it ran, flawlessly, invisibly, because Diana ran it. Lady Ashmore did not run it. Lady Ashmore wrote letters and received calls and chose her gowns, and understood, in some vague, undisturbed corner of her mind, that the candles were always fresh, and the fires were always laid, and the menus were always appropriate to the occasion, and the solicitors' letters were always answered before they required a second sending. She did not wonder very much about how these things came to be so. She had Diana for that. That evening, the Ashmore house received 140 guests for a winter reception, the largest entertainment of the season's early weeks. Diana managed the candles, the florists, the kitchen, the hired footmen who arrived with their livery pressed, but their instructions inadequate, the placement of chairs, the temperature of the rooms, the seating arrangements twice revised, when Lady Ashmore decided at 4 o'clock to reinstate a friendship with a baroness she had dropped in October, and the ordering of the extra champagne that Lady Ashmore had forgotten to authorize until Diana reminded her. She managed all of it before 6, changed into her grey dress, the one she had worn to the last 3 significant occasions, because there was no reason to own a better one, and took her position at the corner of the main salon near the piano, where she could see the whole room and be seen by almost no one. The salon was extraordinary that evening. 200 candles burned in the chandeliers above, throwing light across the assembled coats and gowns like something deliberately designed to be admired. The women wore silk and satin in the current fashion, high-waisted, draped at the shoulder, jewelled at the throat. The men moved in their dark tailcoats with the ease of people accustomed to rooms made beautiful for them by others. The room smelled of flowers, candle wax, and the cold November air still clinging to the last arriving guests. A string quartet played in the corner opposite Diana's position, and no one paid them any particular attention, which was, Diana noted, exactly what music sounded like when it was doing its job correctly. She had been checking the list. The next item was confirming with the head footman that the second champagne delivery had arrived and been uncorked in the correct order, when the door opened again and a silence moved through the room. Not the silence of a single voice stopping, but the kind of silence that travelled outward from a point like weather coming in. Diana looked up. The Duke of Gravenhurst arrived, as if he had decided to arrive, and that decision was the whole of the matter. He was tall, dressed in a black tailcoat with no ornamentation she could identify from across the room, and he moved through the parting crowd the way a correctly constructed bridge bears weight, without apparent effort and without any particular interest in being observed. He spoke briefly to Lord Ashmore near the door, nodded at 2 or 3 men in succession, and then, with the deliberate movement of someone completing an obligation, surveyed the room. Diana had already returned to her list. She was 3/4 through the champagne notation when she became aware that the survey had stopped. She did not look up immediately, because she had learned that whatever paused in her direction in rooms like this one was rarely directed at her. Then she did look up, because the pause continued, and the stillness of it had a quality that was different from the surrounding conversation. Sebastian Vane, 6th Duke of Gravenhurst, was looking at her with the measuring attention of someone who had just identified something they did not yet understand. She held his gaze for one beat, long enough to be honest about it, then returned to her list. There was still the champagne to confirm, and the second course needed approval from the kitchen, and Lady Ashmore had mentioned something about a difficulty with the seating in the smaller dining room that no one had yet explained to Diana's satisfaction. She picked up her pen and went on. Diana Holt had been born in York, the eldest child of a man who believed in careful preparation. Her father had been a solicitor of modest practice and immodest intellect, and he had taught her figures before he taught her needlework, and had taught her to read a contract before he thought to teach her to manage the expression on her face in a drawing room. He had done this not because he thought his daughter's prospects were particularly bright, he was a realist, but because he believed that a person who understood how things actually worked would always be more useful than a person who understood how things were supposed to appear. He was not wrong. He died of a fever when Diana was 19, leaving the practice, such as it was, to a junior partner who had no interest in the arrangement, and leaving Diana with a small annual sum that would not quite cover her expenses if she were to live independently, and a set of skills that the world had not yet figured out what to do with. Her mother's sister in London offered a solution of the kind that is sometimes worse than no solution at all. Diana was invited, the word her aunt used was invited, with its implication of generosity, to join the household in Grosvenor Square as a companion. In practice, companion was a word that covered a considerable variety of unpaid labour. Diana arrived with her father's books, her own notebook, and the intention of surviving. The invitation had been extended 4 years ago. She had survived. She had done considerably more than survive. Within 6 months of her arrival, Diana had reorganized the household accounts, which had been kept in a state of cheerful approximation by a bookkeeper her aunt trusted because he had a pleasant manner. Diana did not require a pleasant manner. She required accuracy, and when she found the approximations, £260 in unrecorded expenditures over 18 months, 3 creditors paid twice for the same delivery, a kitchen account that bore no reliable relationship to what the kitchen had actually purchased, she sat down with the records and a clean ledger and set them to rights. She did not announce what she had found. She corrected it and moved forward. She told her aunt that the accounts had required some reorganization and that she had seen to it, and her aunt said that was very good of her, and asked whether she had confirmed the dressmaker's appointment for Tuesday. She managed the correspondence, not merely the copying and sending of letters already composed, but the actual composition of letters responding to creditors, suppliers, and the various persons and institutions that had claims upon the household's attention and resources. She managed the staff, which required knowing which of them could be trusted with which tasks, which required more careful instruction, and which were working through difficulties in their personal circumstances that affected their reliability. She managed the social calendar, including the diplomatic management of Lady Ashmore's complex system of allegiances and resentments among her social circle, which shifted with a regularity that made the household's accounts look stable. She was, in every measurable sense, the person who kept the Ashmore household standing. She was paid nothing for this. The invitation, her aunt reminded her when the subject of wages arose. Once, in the second year, and Diana had not raised it again, the invitation covered her room and board and her place in society. The place in society was a fiction, but the room was real, and the board was real, and Diana was not yet sure what alternatives she had access to. She managed the situation, because that was what she did. There had been one moment, in the third year, when she might have stopped. She had been up since 4 a.m. managing a household crisis, involving a burst pipe, a ruined carpet in the east drawing room, a plumber who would not arrive until Thursday, and a dinner party that Lady Ashmore declined to cancel, despite all evidence suggesting this was unwise. By midday, Diana had arranged a temporary solution for the carpet, redirected the dinner to a different room, managed the revised seating plan, sent 3 letters, and received a message from the plumber saying he could come Wednesday after all. She had sat down at her desk, the small one in the back room, that no one would have called her desk if anyone had been asked. and placed her hands flat on the surface. There had been a moment when the reasonable thing, the human thing, would have been to put her head down and stop. She had felt that possibility very clearly. She had felt it all the way through. She had straightened her spine, picked up her pen, and continued. Not from resignation. She had been very clear with herself about that. From the decision that she was not going to become less than she was, simply because no one around her could see what she was. She had made that decision as a factual matter, the way she made all decisions, and it had held. The morning after the Ashmore reception, Diana found a card on the small table inside the front door. Cards left for Lord and Lady Ashmore were normally placed on the silver tray near the entrance, and Diana sorted through them each morning before her aunt descended. This one was not on the silver tray. It was on the small table where Diana herself usually set her own items, her list for the day, her notebook, her gloves. It was a visiting card. It read, Sebastian Vane, Duke of Gravenhurst, and on the reverse, in precise handwriting that was not a secretary's hand but his own, were 4 words. You were very efficient. It was not a compliment in any form she had been offered before. She held the card for a moment, then placed it in her notebook, picked up her list for the day, and went to manage the morning. She did not meet him again for 3 weeks. What Diana did not know, and would not know for some time, was that Sebastian Vane had not come to the Ashmore reception by coincidence. He had come because a man named Edward Forsyth, who had advised 3 successive Dukes of Gravenhurst on matters of estate and circumstance, had told him 6 weeks earlier that the Ashmore household was run not by Lord or Lady Ashmore, but by a woman named Diana Holt, who was a dependent relation with no income, no formal position, and no social standing, and who had kept the entire operation solvent and functional for 4 years without acknowledgement. Forsyth had come by this information through the solicitor who had managed the Ashmore accounts before Diana's reorganisation, a man who had been replaced, not unpleasantly, when Diana's version of the accounts rendered the need for his services redundant. The solicitor bore her no particular ill will. He had simply observed, with professional clarity, that the woman was extraordinary at what she did, and had mentioned this to Forsyth over dinner, and Forsyth had written it down. Sebastian's interest was not sentimental. The Gravenhurst estate in Wiltshire, Ashcroft Park, 12,000 acres, 3 tenant farms, a wool merchant arrangement of long standing, and a house that had not been properly staffed or managed in 11 years, was in a condition that he had inherited, and that he had not, in the years since, managed to substantially improve. He had been in the army for the first 4 years of the title, which was a reason but not an excuse. He had been managing the aftermath of his mother's death, which had come in his first year as Duke, before the army, before he had understood what the estate required, and he had not, in the years since, found either the method or the person who could help him make it right. He had tried stewards, 2 of them. Both had been technically competent and functionally insufficient, because the problem at Gravenhurst was not primarily a problem of records or accounts, but a problem of understanding. The estate had become a machine, with several interlocking failures, and what it required was someone who could read the whole of it at once and tell him where to begin. He had read Forsyth's note about Diana Holt twice, and then placed it in his desk drawer. He had taken it out the following week and read it again. He had then instructed Forsyth to gather whatever additional information was available. Forsyth had spoken to 3 people: the Ashmore solicitor, a housekeeper who had left the Ashmore household the previous year under amicable circumstances, and the wool merchant's London representative, who had encountered Miss Holt when she attended a meeting in Lord Ashmore's place, and had apparently renegotiated the delivery terms with a precision that the merchant's representative described, admiringly and with slight bewilderment, as formidable. Sebastian had attended the Ashmore reception to see her for himself. She was at the edge of the room in a grey dress that she had clearly worn before, doing something with a list and a pen, while 140 people performed the theatre of social importance around her. He watched her manage a footman with a brief, precise instruction that sent the man off with evident purpose. He watched her cross the room to speak to a woman near the piano, exchange 4 or 5 sentences, and return to her position with the air of someone who has confirmed a calculation rather than attended a social exchange. He watched her notice everything and respond to nothing that did not require a response, and he understood, with the same clarity with which he understood figures and terrain, that Forsyth's assessment had been, if anything, conservative. He went home that night and wrote her a card. He had been in the army for 4 years and had made decisions affecting the lives of several hundred men. He was not accustomed to uncertainty about the right course of action. He was experiencing something that functioned like it now, and he recognized it not as hesitation, but as the specific sensation of standing in front of a problem he wanted very much to solve correctly. 3 weeks later, Edward Forsyth called on Lady Ashmore with a formal inquiry. Would it be possible for the Duke of Gravenhurst to request the temporary loan, so to speak? The phrasing was Forsyth's and was carefully chosen, of her niece's organisational talents for a period of several months. The Duke's estate in Wiltshire required the attention of a competent administrator, and Forsyth had heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that Miss Holt's capabilities in that area were remarkable. There would be a wage, naturally, a formal wage. He named a figure that was, by the standards of the period, generous, without being ostentatious. Lady Ashmore received this inquiry with the mild surprise of a woman who has kept something of value in a drawer for years and has just been informed by a reliable authority that it is worth something. She said she would of course speak to Diana. She said this as though speaking to Diana were a thing that occurred to her naturally and regularly, which it did not. She was, Diana observed when she was told, doing the arithmetic in her head about what the household would require if Diana departed. Diana asked for 24 hours to consider. She spent the evening at her desk with a clean page and wrote down what she knew, what she needed to know, and what the risks were. She had been doing invisible skilled labour for 4 years. She had not been paid. She had not been credited. She had not been given any indication that the situation would improve. She picked up her list. She crossed off what she had already done. She circled the figure Forsyth had named. She sent her answer the following morning. She arrived at Ashcroft Park on a Tuesday in late November, by hired coach because the Gravenhurst carriage had not been offered and she had not expected it to be. The house appeared in the grey morning light as something that had once been very beautiful and was still trying. The grounds were technically maintained but showed the particular disorder of land managed by people who were doing their best without adequate direction. The hedgerows not quite shaped, the lane not quite gravelled correctly, the kitchen garden visible from the main approach, in a way that suggested no one had thought in some years about what was visible from the main approach. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bramley, met her at the door with the carefully neutral expression of someone reserving judgment. She was a small woman in her 50s, with the composed manner of long service, and she showed Diana to her room, a room that was comfortable and clean, which Diana noted with the specific appreciation of someone who had not been certain it would be, and then showed her to the estate office, where the accounts were kept. The accounts were not a disaster. They were something in some ways less manageable than a disaster. They were a collection of systems that had each been correct at some point, and had then been allowed to drift in different directions at different speeds, so that the total picture was not false exactly, but was deeply unreliable as a guide to the actual condition of the estate. The wool merchant arrangement had not been reviewed in 7 years. The 3 tenant farms were paying different rates with no documented rationale. The staffing costs had increased 16% over 8 years, without any corresponding documentation of what had changed. The household expenditure for the main house bore a relationship to the estate income that was theoretically sustainable but practically precarious, in the way that a structure is theoretically sound until the weather changes. Diana spent her first full day with the ledgers and her notebook. She made no conclusions on the first day, She asked Mrs. Bramley 3 questions and listened to the answers for what they told her beyond the words, which was, in each case, more than the words themselves. On the second day, she walked the estate. She asked to walk it alone, which Mrs. Bramley found unusual, and the head groundskeeper, a man named Thomas Quinn, found suspicious. Diana thanked both of them for their time and walked the estate alone. She spent 4 hours on the grounds and the tenant farms, took 2 pages of notes, and returned to the estate office before the light failed. She had found what she expected to find: 3 specific operational problems, one of which had been quietly worsening for approximately 2 years, and would, if uncorrected, become significantly more expensive within the next 6 months. The Duke of Gravenhurst arrived on Thursday. She heard him before she saw him: the horse on the gravel drive, the particular efficiency of a dismount performed by someone accustomed to it, and she was already at her 2nd page of annotated observations about the wool merchant contract when he appeared in the doorway of the estate office. He was, in person and in daylight, and without 140 people arranged around him, very much the same person she had identified across the Ashmore salon: contained, precise, wearing authority without performing it. "Miss Holt," he said. "Your Grace," said Diana. She did not stand up immediately, because she was in the middle of a sentence in her notes, and she needed to finish it, and she finished it. Then she stood. "The wool merchant contract requires renegotiation. The current terms were set in 1806 and reflect a market rate that has shifted considerably. I believe we can recover approximately £400 annually with a revised arrangement. I would like to request a meeting with the merchant's representative before the end of the month." He looked at her with the same measuring attention she had received across the Ashmore salon, and in his face there was something that was not surprise, but might have been in the vicinity of it. "You have been here 2 days," he said. "Yes," said Diana. "I found the wool contract first, because it's the largest single external arrangement. The tenant farm rates are also worth reviewing, but that's a longer conversation." He was quiet for a moment. He came into the office and looked at the open ledger on the desk, at the notations she had made in the margins, small and precise, in different colours of ink so that categories were distinguishable at a glance. "What colours are the inks?" he asked. "Black for confirmed figures, blue for discrepancies requiring verification, red for items requiring immediate decision. There are 14 red items." He looked at the ledger for another moment. He picked it up, which she had not expected, and held it at a reading distance, and read 3 or 4 entries. She watched his face while he did this, and saw that he was reading with real attention, not performance. He set the ledger down. "You walk the estate first, before the accounts?" he said. "I walk the estate to understand what the accounts should contain. The accounts then tell me whether they contain it." He was quiet for another moment, and in that quiet she could hear the fire in the grate, and the wind at the window, and the settling sound of a house that had been standing for a long time. "My mother managed this estate," he said, "before she died." Diana did not fill the space he left after that sentence. She had learned, from years of practical experience, that spaces left by the people she worked with contained information if she waited for them. "It has been 11 years since anyone opened that room," he said, and he nodded toward the north end of the corridor, which she had not yet been shown. "The music room. She used it every morning." He looked out the window. "I am told you play." "I do," said Diana. "There is no obligation," he said, and the word obligation had a stiffness in it that meant the opposite of what it said. There was an obligation. He had named it by saying there was not, and they both understood this without discussing it. She said nothing further on the subject that evening, but she noted it, in the part of her mind that kept track of things that mattered. The opposition assembled itself within the first week, as Diana had known it would. Lady Cecily Hargrove arrived on Saturday with her mother and a quantity of luggage that suggested a stay of indefinite length. She was the daughter of the Earl of Sefton, She was widely understood to have been intended for Gravenhurst for the better part of 2 seasons, and she was beautiful in the particular way that required no effort, because effort had never been necessary. She arrived in the main drawing room on the evening of her first day, and looked at Diana the way a person looks at furniture they had not expected to find moved, and then she looked away, because that was how you dealt with furniture. "I had not realized the Duke had engaged a housekeeper," she said, to her mother, at a volume Diana was clearly meant to hear. Diana had been reviewing a correspondence file at the writing desk in the corner of the drawing room, because the drawing room had the best light, and the estate office was cold in the evenings. She set down the correspondence, turned, and looked at Lady Cecily with the direct regard she gave to any problem that needed to be clearly understood before it could be efficiently managed. "I am the estate administrator," she said. "My name is Diana Holt. I have been engaged to review the estate accounts and operational systems. I understand there will be further guests this week. I hope your journey from London was comfortable." Lady Cecily received this with the micro-expression of someone who had expected to displace furniture and found that it had spoken. "Quite comfortable, thank you," she said after a moment. Diana returned to the correspondence. She made a small note at the bottom of the page she was reading. Lady Cecily Hargrove, Earl of Sefton's daughter. Present through, at minimum, the week. The Duke has not mentioned her. This is itself informative. She picked up her pen and continued. Lord Ashton Vane, Sebastian's father, who held an earldom that preceded the dukedom in the family history, and retained, with it, a considerable assumption of authority over the family's affairs, arrived on Sunday with no particular notice, and the absolute conviction of a man who considered all properties bearing his family's name to be within his legitimate domain. He was a compact, precise, white-haired man in his 60s who walked through the entrance hall of Ashcroft Park as though counting things that might be out of place. He found Diana in the estate office. "You are the woman Forsyth hired," he said, not as a question. "The Duke of Gravenhurst engaged me on Mr. Forsyth's recommendation, yes," said Diana. "Holt," said Lord Ashton. "Yes." He looked at the desk, at the ledgers, at the organised correspondence files she had created in the 4 days since her arrival. He looked at her with the particular assessment of a man who has decided that the problem in front of him is structural and unfortunate, rather than personal and remediable. "My son requires a duchess," he said, "not an accountant." "He has engaged an administrator," said Diana, "because the estate accounts have not been correctly reconciled in 7 years, and the wool merchant contract has been operating at a loss relative to current market rates. I expect to have a revised proposal for both matters within a fortnight. Is there something specific about the estate you wish to discuss?" Lord Ashton looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man encountering weather he had not consulted the forecast about. "You are aware of your position here," he said. "I am aware of exactly what my position is, Lord Ashton. It is an administrative engagement with a defined scope and a formal wage. I intend to fulfill it competently." She looked at him with the steady regard she gave to all practical obstacles. "I imagine your concerns are about something other than the wool merchant." There was a silence. It was not the silence of capitulation. It was the silence of a man revising his assessment of a problem from simple to complex. "My concerns are structural," he said at last. "Yes," said Diana, "I understood that." And she returned to the ledger, because the red ink items were still 14 in number, and some of them required decisions before the week was out. Sebastian found her in the music room on a Thursday evening. She had gone in on the Tuesday, because the room was part of the estate, and she had a professional reason to inspect it, and also because she had not been able to stop thinking about what he had said regarding his mother. The room was cold. It had been closed for 11 years, and the cold had settled into it like a patient. There was a pianoforte near the window, a good instrument that had been covered with a cloth, but not neglected in any serious way. Someone had maintained it with occasional tuning, which was the sort of detail that told you something important. She had played for approximately an hour on Tuesday. Not anything performing or particular. She had played through what she could remember, settling into the instrument the way you settle into a chair that fits. She had found, in the bench, a portfolio of music. Some of it was standard. Some of it was manuscript, handwritten, in a hand she did not recognize. She had played through 2 of the manuscript pieces, which were lovely and clearly personal, and had felt the particular quality of music that is written by someone for themselves, rather than for an audience. On Thursday evening, she was playing the second of the manuscript pieces again, more slowly, working out a phrase near the middle that wanted attention, when she became aware that she was not alone in the corridor outside the room. She had not heard footsteps, or rather, she had heard them and registered them as one of the household moving past, but the quality of the silence in the corridor, after the footsteps stopped, had a different texture. She finished the phrase, then the page, then lifted her hands. She turned on the bench. Sebastian Vane was standing in the doorway. She did not know how long he had been there. Something in his face told her it had been some time. He was not wearing his coat. He had stopped somewhere, before reaching the room, and had not thought, or had not bothered, to retrieve it. He looked like a man who had come a long distance, though she knew he had only come from the West Wing. "That is hers," he said. His voice was level, but it had the quality of something that had been made level, rather than being naturally so. "Yes," said Diana. "I thought it might be." She held the manuscript page up briefly so he could see it, then set it on the music stand. She was very skilled. The modulations in the second theme are more complex than they appear on the page. They want a particular kind of patience. He came into the room. He crossed to the instrument slowly, not with hesitation, but with the care of someone approaching something that has not been touched in a long time. He looked at the manuscript on the stand. "She used to play in the mornings," he said. "You could hear it from the east corridor if the door was open." Diana did not say anything. She did not fill the space. She pressed one hand briefly against the bench and waited. "I did not open the room when I returned from the army," he said. "I opened it once, in the first year after her death. Not again." He looked at the instrument. "You opened it." "I did," said Diana. "I should have told you first. I apologize." "No," he said, and the word came out with a certainty that surprised her. "No, I am—" He stopped. He looked at the manuscript on the stand. "Will you continue?" "I would not. I only came to—" He stopped again. He was not, she understood, a man accustomed to sentences that failed to complete themselves. He looked at her. "I stood outside for 3 nights," he said, "before I came in." Diana sat for a moment and felt the weight of that. The image of him in the cold corridor, outside a door he had not opened in 11 years, listening. She felt it all the way through, and then she looked at the music stand and straightened her spine. She played the second manuscript piece from the beginning. She played it slowly and correctly, with all the patience the modulations required, and he stood beside the instrument in his shirt sleeves and listened, and neither of them said anything more that evening. His cravat, she noticed when she finally stood to go, had been crooked since at least dinner. She straightened it with 3 efficient movements of her gloved fingers, not quite looking at him. "It has been crooked for approximately 40 minutes, she said. "I know," he said, and the thing in his voice when he said it was not embarrassment. It was something quieter than that. She finished the wool merchant renegotiation in the 3rd week. She had written to the merchant's London representative with a specific, documented proposal. Not a request for renegotiation, but a statement of current market rates, drawn from 3 sources she named explicitly, and a proposed revised arrangement that would result in equivalent profit margins for the merchant, at a figure that reflected actual current market value. The merchant's representative came to Ashcroft Park on a Wednesday. Diana met with him in the estate office. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. She did not raise her voice at any point. She presented the documentation in the order she had organized it, answered his counter-arguments with specific figures, and when he suggested that such things were typically negotiated with the estate's steward rather than he paused here, looking for the word, administrator, she told him that she had full authority to act on the estate's behalf in this matter, which was true, because Sebastian had told her so on the previous Sunday, and she had written it down and had the paper with her. The merchant's representative signed the revised agreement. He shook her hand with the faint bewilderment of a man who had not been entirely prepared for the meeting he received. She walked him to the door, returned to the estate office, and sat down and let her shoulders settle, because she had been holding them quite still for 1 hour and 40 minutes. The revised arrangement would recover £430 annually. She noted this in the ledger in black ink, because it was now a confirmed figure. Sebastian appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. "He has agreed?" he said. "He has signed." She held up the document. "The new rate begins in January. I have also drafted a clause that allows for review every 3 years with reference to published market indices, so the arrangement does not drift again without attention." He crossed the room, took the document, and read it. He read it completely, not performing completion but actually reading, the same attention he had brought to the ledger in the first days. He reached the clause she had added at the end. "You negotiated this too," he said. The merchant's representative did not notice it was not in the original draft. "It is straightforward language." She paused. "It is the kind of thing that wants to be in the document from the beginning, rather than added later." He looked at the clause again. She watched him read it again. Then he set the document carefully on the desk. "My mother would have done exactly this," he said. Not as a comparison that diminished Diana, she could hear that, as something that cost him something to say, and that he said anyway. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," said Diana. She was. He looked at the document. "You would have gotten on." Diana picked up her pen and turned back to the ledger. She was not going to make anything of that sentence in the moment he had given it, because some things want to be received quietly and held without examination, at least for now. But she held it. The morning the investor meeting was convened, 7 men who held interests in the Gravenhurst estate's commercial arrangements assembled in the main dining room with the intention of expressing their concern about what one of them, in his letter requesting the meeting, had called the irregularities associated with recent administrative changes. Diana was in the estate office at 6 o'clock, organising her documentation. She had known the meeting was coming. Lord Ashton had arranged it, though he had not told Sebastian until 2 days prior, and had not told Diana at all. She had found out through Forsyth, who had arrived from London on the Monday, and had come immediately to the estate office, and said, quietly and without warmth but with the precision of a man delivering a useful message, "There will be 7 of them on Thursday. 2 are genuinely concerned about the accounts. 3 are here because Ashton invited them, and they do not wish to offend him. 2 are here because they have heard something about the wool merchant renegotiation and wish to understand it, and they are the ones whose opinion will shift the others. Prepare for the 2. Diana thanked him. She picked up her pen and made a note. She had already begun preparing for all 7. She organised the documentation in 5 sections: the original accounts, her annotated corrections, the wool merchant contract before and after, with a 1-page summary of the financial difference, the tenant farm rate analysis which she had completed the previous week, and a prospectus for the 3 additional improvements she had identified that could be implemented within 6 months at a defined cost and a projected return. She printed the numbers in her clearest hand. She labelled everything. The person being overlooked in any room is often the person keeping the room standing, and Diana had decided, quite specifically, that this was the last morning on which she intended to be overlooked. Sebastian met her in the corridor outside the dining room. He looked at the portfolio under her arm. "They will not make this easy," he said. "I know," said Diana, "but the figures are not theirs to dispute. Figures are what they are." He looked at her for a moment. "I will be in the room," he said. "I know," she said again, and she meant something slightly different by it this time. The 7 investors were arranged around the long dining room table when Diana entered. Lord Ashton was at one end. 2 of the investors, she identified them as the ones Forsyth had flagged, older men with the particular alertness of people who have not reached their position by accepting other people's assurances, were at the far side. The remaining 5 were distributed around the table, with the varied attention of people who had come to witness something and were not entirely sure what it would be. "Miss Holt," said Lord Ashton, with the precision of a man placing a label on a category. "My son's administrator." "Your Grace's administrator, yes," said Diana. She placed her portfolio on the table, opened it, and set the first section in front of her. She looked around the room with the even regard she gave to all practical situations. "I understand there are concerns about the estate's administrative arrangements. I have prepared documentation addressing the current accounts, the revisions I have made and their rationale, and a forward prospectus for further improvements. I am happy to address any specific questions once you have had the opportunity to review the materials. I thought it might be most efficient to begin with the wool merchant contract, since that is the arrangement that has changed most recently." She placed the before and after contract pages at the center of the table. She placed the 1-page financial summary beside them. "The previous arrangement," she said, "had not been reviewed since 1806. The market rate for the wool grade produced on this estate has risen 22% in that period. The revised arrangement, which was negotiated and signed 3 weeks ago, reflects current market rates and will return £430 annually that the estate was previously not recovering. The revised contract also includes a review clause, which means the arrangement will not require renegotiation from the beginning in future, but will be adjusted by reference to published indices." She paused. "If anyone would like to see the market rate sources, I have them in the appendix." One of the older men, she had him as Hartley, based on Forsyth's description, picked up the summary page. He read it. He read the before and after contract pages. His expression did not change significantly, but his attention sharpened in a way she could measure. "These figures are accurate?" he said. "They are. The market rates are sourced from the London Wool Exchange records, which are public. You are welcome to verify them independently." "I intend to," said Hartley, but he said it without hostility. He said it the way a careful man says he intends to verify something he already believes is correct. Lord Ashton was looking at the summary page. Something in his face was doing the arithmetic. She could see him doing it, not publicly, but visibly if you knew how to look. "The tenant farm rates," said another investor. "You mentioned revisions." "I have a proposal, not yet implemented," said Diana. She extracted the tenant farm analysis. "The 3 farms are currently paying different rates, established at different times, with no documented rationale. I am proposing to standardize the rates according to acreage and soil productivity, which I have assessed based on the records and a personal survey of the land. 2 farms would see a modest increase. 1 would see a decrease that reflects the actual productivity of the northern acreage, which has been paying above its appropriate rate for approximately 8 years. The net effect on estate income is neutral, but the arrangement becomes defensible on its merits, which protects the estate from a legal challenge that the current rate structure, if examined, might not survive." Hartley looked at his colleague. There was a communication between them that required no words. Sebastian had not spoken. He was standing at the side of the room, not at the head of the table, not performing authority, occupying the space in the particular way he occupied it, which was to say unmistakably. He was watching the room, and he was watching Diana, and he had the expression of someone who had brought something into the light that he had long suspected was there. "What is the 3rd improvement?" said Hartley. "Your prospectus mentions a 3rd. "The kitchen garden," said Diana. "It is visible from the main approach." "It should not be. There is a practical reconfiguration that moves the productive beds behind the walled section and uses the visible space for a small formal garden that costs less annually to maintain and substantially improves the impression the estate makes on arriving visitors, which matters for commercial guests. Cost: £40 for the initial work. Annual saving thereafter, £22. Time to break even, 22 months. She paused. It is not the most significant item. It was the simplest to calculate. Hartley set down the documents. He looked at Diana with the specific attention of a man who has been waiting to be shown something he had not expected to find in this room. "You surveyed the estate in person," he said. "On my second day," said Diana. "You cannot understand what the accounts should say until you understand what the estate actually is." The room was quiet. Not the quiet of a meeting that has gone wrong, the quiet of a room in which something has been made undeniable. Sebastian took 3 steps forward from the wall. He did not say anything about the prospectus or the documents or the figures. He looked at the room, at his father, at Hartley, at the remaining 5 investors, and he said, "Miss Holt's engagement with this estate is not temporary. I am formalizing her role as estate director, with appropriate compensation and authority. The administrative arrangements she has described will be implemented. Any further questions about the estate's accounts or operational direction should be directed through her office." He paused. "I believe that is all we required this morning." He looked at Diana. He extended his hand to her, not as a gesture of assistance, as though she needed assistance, but in the manner of a public acknowledgement. She set her portfolio under her arm and took his hand, and he held it for a moment while the room absorbed what had been said. And room, here, meant Lord Ashton Vane, who was looking at his son with the expression of a man making a revision to a calculation he had thought was complete. She had not won by charm. She had not won by argument. She had won by presenting 27 pages of organized evidence in a clear hand, and by being the only person in the room who had personally walked the 12,000 acres in question. She picked up her portfolio, and they left the room together. Lady Cecily Hargrove departed for London that afternoon. She did so without any dramatic scene, which was, Diana reflected, a credit to her practical intelligence. She said goodbye to Sebastian in the entrance hall, with the composed graciousness of a woman who has decided to cut her losses before they become larger, and she did not look at Diana, which was also a choice, and also intelligent. She was not destroyed by any of this. She was simply no longer relevant to the situation, and she had recognized that quickly, which meant she would land well somewhere else, and that was fine. The world required women who could read a room. Lady Cecily could read a room. Hartley came to the estate office at the end of the day. He knocked, which none of the other investors had done. He said, "The proposals are sound. I will not oppose them." He did not apologize for having been part of an assembly that had required Diana to prove herself to 7 men who had not read a single page of what she had produced. He said only that the proposals were sound, and he left, and she noted this in her list, under the category of things that were progress, even if they were not sufficient. Lord Ashton found her in the estate office on Friday morning. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and she set down her pen and waited. He was doing something that required some effort, and she gave him time for it. "The tenant farm analysis," he said. "The northern acreage situation. How long had it been operating at the incorrect rate?" "Approximately 8 years," said Diana, "based on the soil productivity records." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife would have identified that," he said. He said it not as a compliment to Diana, or not precisely, but as a fact about his wife, and about what he had failed to replace when she was gone. He looked at the floor once, then looked up. "The proposals are well made," he said. Diana picked up her pen. "Thank you, Lord Ashton." He left. She returned to the accounts. The red ink items were now at 4. Sebastian proposed to her for the first time on a Saturday evening, in the drawing room, with Lord Ashton and Forsyth present, which was to say, in front of the only witnesses his situation currently required. He did it directly, and without preamble, and Diana received it the same way. He said that it would resolve certain social questions raised by her formal position at the estate, and that he believed her continued presence at Ashcroft Park to be, on any practical measure, essential. He said that he recognized this was not a conventional arrangement, and that she should have time to consider. She said she would consider. She did not say yes, because the answer he had asked for was a practical answer to a practical proposal, and while she respected the practicality of it, she was not a practical answer. He did not press her. She picked up her list and went to bed. The second proposal happened on Sunday morning, in the estate office, with no one else present. She was at her desk at 7 o'clock, which was where she always was at 7 o'clock, and he appeared in the doorway and said, "May I?" She nodded. He came in and sat down in the chair across the desk, which was the chair where Forsyth sat, and where the merchant's representative had sat, and which no one had ever used simply to be in the room with her before. He said, "Not because it is convenient, or appropriate, or fitted the requirements my position imposes, but because you opened the music room, and you walked the estate alone on the second day, and you played the second movement until the phrase resolved, and you told me the cravat had been crooked for 40 minutes, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to say." He looked at her. "And because I have been in that corridor outside the music room for 3 nights in my mind for 11 years, and you were the first thing that made me want to go in." Diana set down her pen. She placed both hands on the desk. She thought about it completely, the way she thought about everything, not hurrying through it, not managing it, just holding it clearly and looking at what it was. "Yes," she said. He did not move immediately. He looked at her with the stillness of a man who has just heard something he did not know he had been waiting for. "The tenant farm rates," she said, after a moment. "I should have the revised documentation ready by Thursday." "Yes," he said, and there was something in his voice that she recognized as a man who has just understood that the best things, for him, would arrive in exactly this form, beside the work, inside the ordinary, present without ceremony. They were married in February, quietly, at the parish church nearest Ashcroft Park. Forsyth attended. Mrs. Bramley wept, which she did not mention afterward, and Diana did not raise. The ceremony was brief and correct, and the dinner afterward was managed by Diana, because someone had to, and it was done very well. 3 years later, their son was born, James Edward Vane, who arrived in October with the particular insistence of a person who had already decided he was going to take up a considerable amount of space. He had Sebastian's dark hair and Diana's habit of surveying a room before responding to it, which they both noticed, and neither commented on directly. Lord Ashton came to see the child within the week. He held him with the careful hands of a man accustomed to holding things of consequence, and said nothing particular, and stayed for 2 days, and when he left he shook Diana's hand. It was not warmth, it was the specific acknowledgement of a man who has revised his calculation, and is not going to pretend that he had not made the original error. James was not quite walking when Diana finished the first version of what she had begun to think of as the estate guide, a comprehensive document that set out the Ashcroft Park systems, the wool merchant arrangement and its review process, the tenant farm rate formula and how to apply it, the household accounts and their reconciliation method, and the kitchen garden reconfiguration that had broken even on schedule at 22 months. She had written it because she would eventually want help, and because help trained without documentation becomes dependent on the trainer, and that was a system with a single point of failure. Forsyth read it and said it was the clearest administrative document he had encountered in 30 years of estate work. He asked, with her permission, to share it with 2 neighbouring estates whose situation was in some ways similar. She gave her permission. She made a note. Within 2 years, 5 estates in Wiltshire and the adjacent counties had adopted versions of the framework, adjusted to their circumstances, with her acknowledgement on the title page. This was not something that appeared in the society pages or the kind of record kept by people who recorded such things. But it was a real thing, solid and built to last, and she knew it. On a morning in the winter of the 3rd year of their marriage, she was at her desk at 7 o'clock, with James asleep upstairs. He had been awake at 5, briefly, and she had settled him, and now the house was quiet in the particular way of a house that contains people who are all at rest. And Sebastian appeared in the doorway of the estate office, with his coat over his arm and his cravat, she noted, precisely correct. "You checked it before coming down," she said. "I have been checking it for 3 years," he said. "I am learning." He came and sat in the chair across the desk, not to discuss the accounts were well in hand, simply to be in the room. She was aware of him the way she was aware of the fire in the grate, which was to say with the settled certainty of something that belonged there. She picked up her pen. She opened the ledger. She made a note in black ink, because all the figures now were confirmed figures, and went on. Outside, the Wiltshire fields were white with a January frost, and the kitchen garden was correctly placed, and the hedgerows were correctly shaped, and the tenant farms were operating at their appropriate rates, and the music room door stood open, because she had opened it once, and it had stayed open. James would wake in an hour and come down the corridor at remarkable speed, for a person of his size, and Sebastian would hear him first, because Sebastian always heard him first, and would go meet him, and Diana would listen to the sound of the two of them in the corridor, and note, briefly, that the house was standing, and standing well. She returned to the ledger, the fire held, the morning settled around her, ordinary and complete.